Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to Market Mondays. Happy New Year. So this will be the first one for all of, I guess, the first of 2024 for the Market Mondays. And today we're going to be actually going through a 2024 forecast that Barry Habib has launched. If you guys don't know who that is, that's pretty much who basically trained me on how to read all these market data stuff, how I'm able to talk somewhat intelligently about how things work when it comes to the economy and what's expected and how it impacts mortgage rates as well as the real estate industry. So he launched his 2024 forecast, which I'm going to go through from our point of view. Before we get right into it, do a quick dad joke. So, what happens when you touch Dwayne Johnson's butt? What happens when you touch his butt, the Rock's butt? You've hit rock bottom. All right, so getting right into it. So, 2024 forecast, everyone's a lot more excited about 2024, and for a lot of good reasons, because we've had honestly, we just had a really crappy past 2 years. And as far as real estate and production and business growth, just really tough on everyone who wanted to do well in this business. At least for me, I wanted to take the time to really regroup and make things a lot better, systems, processes, technology, things like that. Now, when I got the chance to go test those things out, production went way down, and we're just trying to survive those 2 years, right? So 2024 is a lot more bright, a lot more interesting, especially in relation to where we came from, or relatively to where we came from and where we started. So hopefully everyone does really well if you're still in the business this year. So let's get right into it. So 2024 forecast. We're going to go in today is basically what's expected to happen in 2024. So one of the things that we have to go into, and the main key thing, is inflation. Now, there's multiple types of ways to measure inflation, and they come out 3 times in 1 month, every month. So the main thing we're going to keep our eye on is what's something called CPI and core PCE. Core CPI and core PCE are just a version of the CPI or their PCE original report. There's some things that are stripped out, but we kind of look at something, kind of the central things of the numbers. So as far as you know, this is what core inflation for each of these reports look like. Now, there's 3 of them. There's CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, PCE, Personal Consumption Index, and there's PPI, Producer Price Index. We're just focused on the first 2 today. So these 2 come out again every month, and right now their current readings year over year in November was 4.0, 3.2%. Now, just so you guys know, the month that these inflation reports come out are for the previous month. So the December, when it comes out in December, it actually comes out for November. So this is what the current numbers look like right now, what we have. So this is a year-over-year number, and the reason why we want to bring up this chart is because shelter has a huge impact on how inflation trends. So for core CPI, it's about 44%. So almost half of what's measured in that inflation report is shelter costs, and 21% for PCE. Now, the shelter costs are mostly just rent, and how this is measured is a year-over-year change. So for a while, during the COVID crisis, there was a point where rents, basically shelter costs, went up 14% year-over-year. Now, that's a big change. That's a huge change. Now, over time, as we got out of the COVID crisis, it started to go down significantly. And now it's currently around 2.5%, which is way more reasonable, right? If you guys remember, rent prices were just skyrocketing. It got really unaffordable in a lot of ways. It got to a point where people started buying homes instead of renting, and now it's vice versa, where people are feeling renting is a better option than mortgage because rates are so high. Now, why this is important is because how the Fed is going to determine their decision and how they raise the Fed funds rate in what happens with these core inflation reports at 4.2 and 2.2. So right now, with the year-over-year average and how it impacts the CPI and PCE reports, is that it's about 6.7, 6.5, right? Well, the current data shows it's 2.5%, but because these numbers are 6.7, right, and 6.5, what they're looking at is the last 12 months reports. So what happens is these last 12 months of numbers are being averaged, and it becomes about 6.7, 6.5. As we go further into the year, what's going to happen is that the last 12 months, the 12th month, or the number for 12 months, gets lower and lower and lower, which will drive this percentage lower and lower and lower as well. as you know, it's already reached its peak. Again, this is an average. As we continue through the year, this number will start going down. What that does, it will bring inflation further down and down because of how much shelter impacts those inflation reports. And how those why this is important is that inflation is pretty much the foundation of what drives mortgage rates and what the Fed is going to do with the Fed funds rate when they decide to either cut rates or when they're going to start cutting rates. So that's a big number. So why that's important is also there's a lag effect of about 1.8%. So if we're using if we took out the lag of waiting for the average year-over-year shelter cost to come down, we would actually be looking at an inflation of about 2.2, which is pretty good. So which means it's going to be trending in the right direction and bringing inflation down. Again, that's going to be a key thing in regards to how the Fed is going to cut rates and also how it's going to impact mortgage rates moving forward. Now, we'll kind of give you a broad spectrum of what that shelter costs and how that math works is that this is how, if you add all these numbers up, this is basically how we get the year-over-year average in regards to what shelter prices are doing. So they basically just add the last 12 months of numbers is essentially what they're doing. So as we go into the next month, this high number gets replaced. This high number gets replaced with a much lower number, at least we hope. And then after the first quarter of 2024, the averages, the numbers being used in the average get lower and lower and lower. Now, after probably the first quarter of 2024, it's going to not move very much. But after the next 3 months, the idea is that inflation is going to have a huge impact because these numbers will be replaced by lower numbers, which means it lowers the average by a bit, which is a really big number. So if you kind of look at the next few numbers, we're going to see the CPI inflation report be released in about 3 days, January 11th. And hopefully what we see is that this next month's number, November's number, is a lot lower, which will be replaced by this December number, which is 0.79, where they're expecting around 0.2-ish, maybe 0.4, still going to be almost half as much as this number, which will bring the inflation average down. So that's kind of the idea of what's expected to happen over the next course of the months, of why inflation is expected to come down, and then the year-over-year average also comes down as well. So you kind of predict when inflation is going to have that big impact. Now, depending on the decision of what the Fed decides to do, their goal is to get that core PCE inflation number to about 2%, right? So the monthly estimate of the inflation report that's coming out it's about to be 0.1, and that's going to bring inflation down quite a bit. And that's expected over the next 2 months, depending on how those inflation numbers come out. So if, let's say, the number, what's going to happen is that this number about 12 months ago, it was a 0.39. Once we get the new months, this gets replaced by a 0.1 number. Now that's a lot. That's a big change. That's a 0.28. So if that were the case, inflation would drop down from 3.16 to 2.87, right? So basically they add up the last 12 months on a running average. So the new month replaces the oldest month. So 0.287, and if the next few months still show lower, what's going to happen is that they're going to decide when they're going to probably cut rates. The expectation is probably around March, is what we talked about too. And once this core PC year-over-year number hits under 2.5, they feel like a lot of the Fed members will want to cut the Fed rate by maybe 25 basis points, which we'll go into in just a little bit. So this is kind of the expectation throughout the year. We're expected to see potentially 2% by the summer for inflation. Now, this is market odds of when they plan to do that, just like kind of DraftKings, where they kind of figure out what the odds are of a decision. This is kind of the same thing. So they don't think that there's a 7% chance that they'll cut rates on January 31st, but there's most likely they won't. And when we get over to March 20th meeting, they may decide to drop the Fed rate by 50 basis points. So a basis point is 50 basis points is 0.5%. That's what it is. It's 50.5%. And by May 1st, pretty strong chance that they're going to lower the Fed funds rate by then. So if we kind of look at what the expectation is over the next couple of years, starting in 2024, A lot of the two Fed members think they don't need to do cuts by at all. There's one Fed member that thinks that we need to cut it by 0.25%. A lot more than think we should cut it by between 0.5% to 1%. And then there's one guy that's wants to cut it by 1.5% by the end of the year. So it just depends on how things play out with inflation and what they end up deciding when all these reports come back, jobs report, inflation reports, BLS job reports, things like that. Now, if you notice over the next couple of years, as these Fed rates come down, you notice that the Fed's members have decided to make a decision on where they feel that the Fed rate should be by the end of those years in 2025 and 2026. How this impacts you is what's going to impact with mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are expected to come down further and further. As inflation goes down, mortgage rates will come down. The Fed doesn't necessarily need the Fed rates to be that high anymore because they'll just drive those numbers even further down. So we don't need that momentum anymore. So this is what the Fed feels like what they're going to need to do with the Fed rate, which also ultimately impacts mortgage rates, which means we could see mortgage rates, I would love to see mortgage rates in the 4 and 3.5% again, and hopefully we may see that in the next 3 years. I don't know. It's really hard to say that, so we'll see how the economy reacts after this year. But that's kind of what their plan is that their plan is that mortgage rates Fed rate, they're going to cut the Fed rate as inflation comes down. As inflation comes down, so will mortgage rates. So you kind of see this trend over the next couple of years, what they expect to do. Now, the most important, the other thing is the balance sheet. I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but the Fed has a balance sheet of all these things, investments they have. Now, since the COVID crisis and our recession in 2020, the Fed has significantly increased their balance sheet from like almost 4 trillion to 8.5. So they doubled it in about 2-3 years. Now they're trying to get rid of those investments off their balance sheet. Why this is important is that they're holding a lot of the mortgage-backed security paper, which is a mortgage investment. The interest rate that you make or that you pay for on your mortgage actually goes to pay for an investor. Okay, that's just how mortgages work. Now, the Fed bought a lot of those, so they kind of reduced this. They bought a lot, which is one of the reasons why mortgage rates got down so low in 2020. Well, they're trying to offload that, and that's kind of an additional thing that's keeping mortgage rates high. Is because they're selling and adding more inventory of mortgage-backed securities onto the market for people to buy. So as this stuff gets taken out, they're going to flood the market for more securities, and that's kind of what's causing rates to kind of maintain steady until we start seeing the Fed start selling stuff off, as well as more inventory on the market for people to buy. I don't want to go into too much this detail. It's mostly about how, in comparison, what the GDP is versus the total securities that the Fed has. Their hope is to reduce it by quite a bit in regards to their balance sheet at the very least. So they're trying to bring it down as much as they can within reason of the GDP increase. All right, so going into the next thing, mortgage rates do eventually decline through a recession. So it takes a while. As you notice, after every gray area, the shaded area is a recession. As you notice, every shaded area we've had, mortgage rates have come down. So the Fed is doing their best to not push us into recession, or if anything, we're going to have recession-like conditions. Now, what's the forecast in 2024? Right now, with everything going on, the Fed rate, inflation, right now the expected is about high 6s, mid 5s. So we're basically in the high 6s right now, so we're in the high end of it. But we hope to see that the rate that doesn't cost anything to be around the mid 5s. Now, there's still going to be an opportunity to buy your rate down to, if rates get to the mid 5s, there's going to be an opportunity to buy your rate down to under 5, depending on how everything works out. They're saying a lot of when rates get under 6%, it's going to give the opportunity for those buyers who are trying to upgrade, right? Who are looking to, they're trying to upsize their house. Now, for the 10-year Treasury, this is also a trend of how we measure what mortgage rates are doing. So they're expected to kind of stay between 3 to 4.4%. Right now, they're in the high 4% range. So we hope that Treasuries come down, because that's also a good indicator that mortgage rates will come down. Now, 2024 inventory, as you guys know, is all still very tight. So we're still just a little over a million of inventory in 2023. It was a little bit lower last year. With the rates being higher, there's not as many buyers, but there's still quite a bit of inventory out there. So the reason why there's a lot of more inventory than it was last year, again, is because a lot of buyers got priced out. Now, the important fact moving forward is that supply and demand is dependent also on the amount of buyers wanting to buy a house. So in 2023, we saw over 2,000 million. So these are in the millions. 2,000 million, so 2 billion almost. Household formations are basically, let's say your son goes off to buy a house. They are forming a household. That's what that is. So we'll notice that that's more than 1 million, obviously, and the amount of homes they're trying to build this is 2 million. So this is how many homes are being completed. So if you think about the inventory that we have now, which is just about 1 million, and the amount of homes being completed, we really still don't have enough inventory. And this is one of the reasons why home prices has stayed high, because there's so much demand, and there still will remain a lot of demand, especially when mortgage rates come down. So if there's a time to buy a house, this will be it, especially right before mortgage rates go down quite a bit, because as mortgage rates come down, there's going to be a huge influx of buyers. Now, another thing is affordability. The media has talked about affordability and how tough it is on affordability. So let's kind of go into 2021 on a $240,000 house at 2.875. The principal and interest payment was about $1,000, not including taxes and insurance. And you're making $4,000 a month. Well, in the next year, let's say this current year, because of how basic mortgage rates tripled, that makes your mortgage payment about $800 more, which is an 80% increase. Now that's a big number. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. Huge number. However, do we need an 80% increase in income to match that? So not really, because all it has to do is go up $800, which is a 20% increase in monthly income. ADP, which is a big employment resource, a lot of us have that through our pay system. Incomes have risen 15% since 2021. So it's kind of matching in that sense. It's not completely matching, but it's getting closer. So whatever the media is saying in regards to affordability, it's not entirely as bad as they say. I'm not saying it isn't bad. I'm just saying it's not as bad. So wages are somewhat staying on track with how high mortgage rates have gotten. Now, not with the price of goods and everything exponentially getting more expensive. I get it. Things cost more now. So in 2024, for the nationwide appreciation forecast, the appreciation is expected to be 4.5% to 5%. This last year, we maybe had 1 or 2% or 3% really in the last year for 2023. 2024 expected to be 5%, which is kind of on track with basically the national average since 1944. To give you guys an idea, since I would say 2018, 2019, we've been seeing at least in Washington State, we've been seeing double-digit appreciation every single year since about 2022. Now, that's a really unsustainable number. It's a great number for a lot of people who have owned homes throughout those times. Not a great number for those who are trying to buy a home, who believe that they had to reach a certain amount of income to buy a house, and then all of a sudden home prices are about 20% higher. In Washington State, that's another $100,000 on a house, right? So that's really expensive. No, so I'm glad that nationwide appreciation is getting under the double-digit numbers, getting closer to what the actual national average should be, which is about 3 to 5%. In other markets, it's going to be different. Most likely in the West Coast states, it's going to be probably closer to 10%, maybe 7, maybe 8%, depending on the situation. But we don't know yet. So right now, nationwide appreciation is about 5%, which is good. And then transaction volume up to about 15 to 20% because mortgage rates are coming down. So hopefully you guys are seeing that impact on your business. I hope to see that impact on my business as well, so that we can all maintain our business and just do the good work that we are hoping to do. So a lot of good news, I would say, for this coming year. stay in it, guys. Don't worry, we'll get through it together. If you have any questions, let me know. If you love me to present this into your office, to your client, to anyone, to a group of people, I love to do it. As you guys know, I love to teach. So reach out to me and we'll get it teed up. Otherwise, that's all I got for you guys. Hopefully, you guys have a great, amazing year, and I will talk to you guys later. That's all I got.